This is the CBS Evening News.
Good evening, Richmond. I'm Alvin K. Seltzer, and I'd like to welcome you to a very special CBS 6 News broadcast. Today we have Dr. Willie Think, PhD, in studio to talk about how the internet is affecting our brains both chemically and physically. But before we get started with that, let's go to Aaron Justice and take a quick look at the upcoming week's weather forecast.
We had beautiful weather here for this weekend, mostly sunny skies and highs in the upper 80s. Overnight tonight, partly cloudy, mild, with those temperatures dropping down into the mid 70s. Now we've got some big changes here for the upcoming work week. Starting tomorrow, we're going to have a volcanic eruption right near Charlottesville, and it's going to make things rather toasty across the area. We're going to see lava spill out into central Virginia and make temperatures in Richmond at 350 degrees, Fredericksburg at 345, Charlottesville, the hot spot, at 400. Not as hot off towards the Tidewater. A little bit more comfortable with highs near 100 degrees. The reason why, we're going to have tidal waves moving in ahead of this, a global superstorm developing off towards the Atlantic Ocean. This thing is headed our way, but the key to the forecast, right before this thing makes landfall, it is going to be deflected by Godzilla. Now, a lot can change between now and then. We're looking at the latest data. We'll continue to bring you the very latest. I do want to encourage you, though, that if you ever do see a sleeping coyote, do not wake it. Bad idea. Okay, here's the forecast. Volcano 350 there for Monday. Global superstorm on Tuesday. We could see maybe about 200 inches of rainfall, wind gusts up to 1,000 miles an hour. Godzilla Wednesday, I'll be honest, I have no idea what's going to happen on that day. After that, though, how about this to finish off the work week? Low humidity, lots of sunshine, with highs in the upper 80s heading into next weekend.
Gee whiz, Aaron. It looks like we had a real doozy of a week ahead of us. Let's move on now to tonight's featured segment. CBS News would like to welcome Dr. Willie Think to the studio. Dr. Think, how are you doing today?
Al, I'm doing very good. Thank you for asking. Very happy to be here.
So, Dr. Think, we have a handful of questions for you today, but let's get straight to the point. One main question is, do you think the internet truly affects our brain?
Al, that's a very complex question, but the answer is I absolutely think the internet affects our brain. To start off, I'd like to show you guys a clip from my friends over at Academic Earth that kind of gives you a background of how this works.
How does human memory work? 20 years ago, you might have found your answer in a book or by asking a friend. But today, you'll Google it. There were 3.5 million searches in 1998. Now, there are 4.7 trillion search queries every day. When something changes our lifestyle so monumentally, you can bet it's changing us as well. Google has become our external hard drive. In a recent experiment, college students remembered less information when they thought they could easily access it later. We used to rely on friends and family members for this method of memory outsourcing, remembering who knew what rather than the information itself. But now, Google is the friend with all of the expertise. If the sum of all knowledge is constantly available in our pockets, is it any wonder that we've stopped bothering to keep it in our heads? Neurons that fire together, wire together, and the same goes for those that fire apart. Neuroimaging of frequent internet users shows twice as much activity in the prefrontal cortex as sporadic users. This part of the brain is reserved for short-term memory and quick decision-making. Essentially, our brains recognize that most of the flood of online information is trivial and doesn't deserve our full attention. The problem is, the brain does what we train it to do. And every time we open a browser, we prepare for skimming instead of learning. So even if we really want to remember something from Google, our brains are predisposed to forget. Everything we ever wanted to know is available to us, and we have conditioned ourselves to ignore it. What do we actually know? If the goal is to forge a creative mind through critical thinking, our Google amnesia may be problematic. The information and experience that gets encoded into our long-term memory is the basis of our unique intelligence. Still, we may be able to mitigate the impact to our long-term memory by adapting our response to this new reality. After all, we can't stop the sea change of the information age. In recent years, American schools have focused less on fact memorization and more on teaching students to make innovative connections between the curriculum and real life. This way, it's less about the knowledge you have and more about how you use the information at hand.
As you can see, Al, the internet is doing a handful of things for our brain every day. The internet, in a way, is our external hard drive. We don't have to remember phone numbers or addresses anymore. Instead, we just hop right on our email or go on to Google and we can look anything up. In fact, according to a study by Science magazine, the internet has become a primary form of external and transactive memory, where information is stored collectively outside ourselves, and our brains have become reliant on the availability of information. Moving on, Al, children are actually learning a lot differently nowadays than they used to be. Educators are beginning to understand that information is now coming at us through a fire hose. It's coming quicker and faster than it ever has before. In fact, it's coming so fast we can hardly digest it. Memorizing facts wastes valuable brain power that we could be used on doing stuff that's much more important. Instead, why don't we quickly look stuff up on Google? It's much easier. Another point I have is we rarely give anything our complete attention anymore. Have you ever updated your Facebook while listening to music and texting a friend? I know I have. If so, you've experienced the phenomenon of continuous partial attention and its impact on your brain. And the last point is we don't bother to remember anymore. In another study by Science magazine, students were asked to type in pieces of trivia, and depending on their group, were told that their information would either be erased or saved. The group that was told their data would be saved were less likely to remember. This study indicated that people have lower rates of recall when they can expect to be able to access information in the future.
Dr. Thing, that's really some interesting stuff you just shared with us. Can you enlighten us on more?
Al, you'd be surprised to know that that's just the tip of the iceberg. There are many risks involved with the internet, such as risk number 1, the internet may give you an addict's brain. MRI research actually shows that the brains of internet users who have trouble controlling their craving to be constantly plugged in exhibit changes similar to those seen in people addicted to drugs and alcohol. Risk 2, you may feel more lonely or jealous. Social media may make it easier to connect with others, but recent research by German scientists suggests that constantly viewing images of others' vacation photos, personal achievements, etc. can trigger strong feelings of envy and even sadness. Risk number 3. Internet use may heighten suicide risk in certain teens. After conducting a review of previous research on studies on teens' internet use, researchers at the University of Oxford in England concluded that online time is linked to an increased risk of suicide and self-harm among vulnerable adolescents. And lastly, risk number 4, memory problems may be more likely. According to Dr. Eric Franzen, professor of computer science at Sweden's KTH Royal Institute of Technology, even a rather typical session of social media browsing can lead to information overload and make it harder to file away information in your memory. Another study, a 2009 study from Stanford University, suggests that the brains of people who are constantly bombarded with several streams of electronic information, from instant messaging to blogs, may find it difficult to pay attention and switch from one job to another efficiently.
Wow! I had no idea.
Yeah, Al, as you can see, there's a lot to be said about what technology is actually doing to our brains.
Do you think this phenomenon will ever have any effect on our future college grads in the workforce?
Al, I really do, but in my opinion, I think that companies will have to understand what is happening and do some of the changes on their own to really have continued success. This is not a case where just a few people are affected by the internet. There are actually millions of people, and I believe that change is inevitable.
Well, folks, that concludes our segment on CBS News tonight. Dr. Think, thank you for joining us today.
I appreciate you having me.
I'm Al Seltzer.
And I'm Dr. Think.
Have a great night.
Richmond.